Welcome back to the Intentional Intern podcast. This week's guest is Alyssa Evans, the founder and owner of, well, a couple things. She's the founder and director of the Atlanta Book Club, a relationship-driven reader community in Atlanta, and Grounded Marketing, a marketing agency that specializes in grounding, creating, and enhancing brands. Beyond that, she is the owner of Elocin Boutique, an online secondhand store selling modern and trendy women's clothing, shoes, and accessories. She also co-founded another company called Hauswarm with her sister, which we'll dive into during the episode. Long story short, Alyssa is that girl in many facets. Throughout the episode, Alyssa and I's candid conversation goes down many paths, from getting laid off from her corporate job, how her businesses came to be, and my personal favorite thing to yap about, how she's creating community in so many ways. Her story is the perfect way to end off this year by seeing the success that's on the other sides of all the trials and tribulations. With 2025 being right, and I do mean like 48 hours right around the corner, I know this conversation is the perfect way to recognize what we've been through, reflect, and recharge for the new year. For those who want to connect with Alyssa, which you definitely should, you can find her LinkedIn and all of her businesses linked below. And I encourage you to support every single one. Let's dive into our final episode of the year. Hi, Alyssa. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm ready for the new week. So, I'm glad that we're both doing well and we're both able to just relax and get started with a new episode to kick off the week, but also just to go a little bit more about how things are going to go for us.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And I would love if you could start by introducing yourselves to our audience.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Alyssa Evans, and I'm like, where do I even begin with my story? There's just so much. But I will say what I'm doing now is I am a marketing consultant. I own my own marketing consulting company called Grounded. Started that like a month or two ago. I'm so excited about it. I love doing it. I also have a boutique called Elocin Boutique that I started in high school, almost like, 10 years ago at this point. And so that's grown. I do a lot of stuff with Poshmark. And so I've had some cool experiences with them. And then I'm like, what else am I doing? My goodness. Then I just recently launched a company with my sister, co-founded it, called Hauswarm. It's a company focused on bridging the gap and providing spaces for conversations to happen, especially in beautifully designed, intentional spaces. And so at the beginning of our launch, we're kind of doing more homey, personal touches into spaces, like working with the book club. Speaking of book club, I'm not doing any more companies, y'all. We're stopping. I started the Atlanta Book Club in November of last year. It's been such an incredible journey. Really has been a passion project. So what it is basically a club that really brings people together, focused on building meaningful relationships around people who love to read. So that looks like a lot of things. So we do book discussions, we do walks, we do book swaps, socials. We kind of do the whole gambit. We volunteer with local organizations. We love working with Atlanta Mission. So yeah, that's kind of the breadth of what I kind of am involved in.
So long story short, she does everything.
I need to stop. No more. Too much free labor. I need to get paid for most of it.
Wow. Like, where do we even begin with that? There are so many things that you're doing right now that are so impactful, whether that's within the community or even from your own standpoint of just what's been your core since high school. Who are you at your core? What are the things that drive you to do all of these things that you're doing on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis?
Yeah, like I don't think I realized it until I started the book club and being involved in my church. Like I serve on the greeting team and volunteer in different areas of my church. And I think I realized the meat of what I do is I just love people. And however I can do that and build space for that is what I do. And I don't assume that someone's going to come behind me and solve the problem. If I see a problem, I'm assuming it's my problem until I realize I can't fix it. And then I pass it on to someone else. So I think that's why a lot of these things started, is because I'm not waiting for the person to start. I'm like, if I have the skills and ability to fix something, I'm going to at least try. And if I can't, I'm going to put the problem onto somebody else or tell someone else, hey, I see this. Like, can you help? So I think that's why a lot of things started. I just have a love for community. And I just see such a need for spaces where people can really talk about what they're going through, whether that's about books, like it might start with a book, but really usually the conversation starts there, but then it talks about their life and like what they're going through. And like that's the whole point, is to really provide a platform for meaningful conversation relationships to be built. And so like that's kind of like the meaning of Hauswarm. That's the book club. That's like the marketing. I'm helping businesses establish a brand story and telling stories that mean something and create relationships and customers that come to them and create something that people care about. So a lot of what I do, as much as it is, it really does come together in a way of like that's the bread and butter of what I do. And I think that brings so much joy for me. And so, yeah, so that's kind of like the main thing of what I do.
Wow, you're so community driven and so people driven. It's like for me looking in a mirror, because that's the basis of my core and where I come from and everything that I do. So it's super nice to see that reflected in different ways, especially from like a marketing standpoint. And a big part of what you were talking about is really just cultivating those spaces where people can connect. And that usually opens up the grounds for like a bunch of things to flower and fruit the way that they do, especially from a company standpoint. And marketing is a huge skill. So, was that something that you've always had? Is that something that you've always been interested in?
Yeah. So from, well, I will say this from the beginning, like I just knew I was going to be called not necessarily to marketing, but actually, let me answer the question before we go to tangent. Let me just answer the question. So, so marketing, I probably had a love for that when I started Elocin Boutique. When I like built a website. I started doing social media for it, and really building a brand around it. And I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. Like figuring out ways to like engage with people and kind of create like that community around it. And then I went into college with the plan of going into business school. I went to Emory and took a math class. And the math class I was needed to get into business school, and I was doing terrible. I was getting single digits on tests. Like it came to the point where like my professor, when I would go to office hours, he would just like push the tissue over to me. He's like, "Yeah, we know it's about to happen. We know." And so like it was so defeating and it was so unfortunate. Luckily, because I was a first year student and I think it was like in the beginning of the semester, I was able to drop without penalty. And so I went to my advisor and I told her what was going on. And she was like, Alyssa, like, why are you even taking a math class? You're a psychology major. I said, what are you talking about? And she's like, you're a psych major. And she's like, just take QTM. So I ended up taking QTM, being a psych major, and fell in love with psychology and sociology. But the thing is like I assumed because I was a psych major that I couldn't do business at all. Like I assumed like I was supposed to become a therapist. Like no one told me that you could do something outside from major. Like no one had that conversation with me. And so in my head, I was like, my business, like my marketing desire to do that as a career is like gone. So I was literally planning on getting my PhD literally up until 4 months before I graduated, when I got an email from a private equity firm, and they were like, hey, like we remembered you from an interview I did like last year for a marketing internship. And they're like, we have these internships available if you want to apply. Next thing I knew, I ended up applying to like two other companies, and not the company I ended up getting a full-time role for. I ended up applying to other ones, and they ended up being like, actually, Alyssa, this one's for you. And next thing I knew, I'm talking to the marketing team, I'm talking to the CMO. And then I ended up getting the job as a marketing intern and then getting hired full-time as a marketing coordinator for the company. And so like that's kind of how that journey was. It's like Elocin really started it off for me, and then I kind of went through it with math, thinking that like I wasn't good enough for it. And then we found our way back. So I love it now.
I feel that about math, actually. I'm not the person that anybody wants to come to with their books, with their whatever. I'm going to either get you fired or I'm either going to have you fail.
And it was so fast paced. Like you literally had two classes to learn a concept. In high school, like I was in IB, and they taught us how to use a calculator more than they actually taught us how to do math. So when I got into college and they said we can't use calculators, I said, hold on, what's going on? So yeah, I was lost. So maybe I think I am good at math because I love math in high school. I was great at math in high school, but I don't know what happened there. So, but I feel like you can do math. Is what my point is. You can do math. It's just you just need the right environment to do it.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna double that and give it to the next person. Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
You never know.
I know. I'm not good. I'm not good at all. You know how people always say, like, stay positive. I'm positive. I am not good at math, and I will literally screw up anybody else's, whether it's your taxes, your Excel sheets. Don't even put me in that position. Otherwise, the team can go ahead and pack it up.
Well, here's the thing nowadays. Who actually knows how to do math when there's like everyone uses a calculator or a technology platform to do the math. So it's like really anybody can do it. I'm just saying, just give me the resources. That's all I'm saying.
Hey man, I'm gonna leave that to the trusted individuals. That's huge though, still, that math didn't stop you, because that definitely would have stopped me. And also being another social science girly, I think that was a big part of my journey that was almost like so like clear for me of nobody had the conversation with me of you can do whatever you want to do with your degree, just because my degree was already built like that, where it was literally like, yeah, you have anthropology. There's, I mean, a small maybe percentage of what we actually talked about within my degree was here's how you be an anthropologist. Where like my big break came from where we had our senior seminar and they're like, here's everything you can do with anthropology. And you could do almost anything with it in every sense of the word. And then the rest of like the years beforehand were like, okay, here are the main 4 things that people do with anthropology, versus that last semester was like, oh yeah, here's the rest though. And so you having that moment kind of saying, I never got that. And people just saying like, oh, well, just do blah, blah, blah. And hopefully there's a lesson that even universities can kind of take from that, is finding a way to holistically be able to showcase what you can do with your degrees. It probably would have helped a lot sooner, and especially with where you ended up and how you even ended up with a full-time role out of it. So once you had your full-time role, where did you go from there?
Yeah. So once I had my full time role as marketing coordinator, I worked there for in total between like the internship and the full time role. I think it was what, a year and like 8 months before I got laid off. And so after that, like after getting laid off, like I one thing I didn't know is like if I was gonna get laid off, God allowed that to happen. And so like I felt so much peace and I maintained joy about it because I knew like if he allowed that to happen, something great is coming. And I learned so much throughout that whole entire job. Like I learned at one point I was doing social media, I was over events, I was doing email campaigns, I was over like deciding what was going to go in our studios. We had like 29 different locations. It was a beauty company. And so like deciding what each studio would have in their locations for our campaigns and like what was going to go on the wall, what was going to be on the table, like different things like that. And so I had such great opportunity and access to so many different pockets of marketing. And what that allowed for me to do is gave me so much confidence when I decided to start my marketing company of like, I can literally like help. And I started a couple of businesses too. So I could literally help someone start a business literally from the ground. That's why it's called Grounded too, from the ground up, because I had access and I had roles in basically each side of marketing. And so like I just learned so much from that company. So yeah, so that was after getting laid off, it's just been such an interesting ride of like being unemployed, but also like being featured in magazines, and then Poshmark had me like do a sponsor segment for them on like 11 Alive, and then I'm going to be speaking in like a week or two in Nashville at their conference. So it's like stuff is like happening, and I'm like, what is going on? And then with book club, like we're getting cool collabs like I didn't think we'd get, and like businesses want to work with us, and I'm like, what is going on? So I'm like, I know it has to be God just allowing me to be able to do these things, because if I didn't get laid off, like if I had was still in that role, like I wouldn't be able to do stuff with Poshmark as often, at least as I am, because like obviously it'd be conflict of like companies and branding. So like everything just worked out exactly what it needed to how it needed to happen. And so yeah, it's been a fun time.
Yeah. And I love that, like, when one door closes, another one opens. And in your case, multiple. Go ahead. And that's awesome of you just being able to have all of these opportunities that have enabled you to not only utilize the passions that you've developed, but also be able to have them go further and even have them have opportunities that have led to future things or future engagements that you might have later on in the future. I mean, like, who else can say, oh, yeah, I was laid off and then I ended up on the news. So, and that's a crazy journal entry. I'm just saying, like, it's this weird kind of interim area of like, you're having all these things happen that are amazing. And then you have these growing pains that like always come out of, when you are usually going through like some of your hardest struggles, it's usually like a big light, usually at the end of the tunnel of like, okay, and that helps me get through some of the hardest times that I've ever been through. Like, okay, I know when something bad is happening or like a rhythm of bad things are happening and things are sucky, that usually means that, okay, something good is about to happen. So I will grin and bear it as much as I can because I know things are probably operating, especially in realms I cannot see, for my greater good. And so just allowing myself to be as present as possible, and it also keeps me to be more grateful for those things. It really can help like go throughout life and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and I think having that mindset too allows for you to deal with things that arise so much more easily. Because if you view things as a door closing, because a door goes both ways. Like a door has to close for it to open too. Like it goes both ways. So it's like if you view every opportunity like that, if a door is closing, that means, oh, this thing has to open back. Like something has to open back again. And it's like it's hard to even consider something as like a failure or a defeat when it's like, no, stuff like this has to happen in order for success or where you need to be to happen. Like if you ask any entrepreneur, there's some sort of like quote unquote like failure story that had to happen for them to be like, oh wait, I need to pivot. And then they create this multi-million-dollar company that actually is the thing that sets them off. So it's like you never know what that thing is, and just allowing it not to be defeating for you, but use it as a motivation to be like, okay, what is the thing that we need to do now to get where we need to be?
Exactly. And I'm sure that you've learned like your fair share of lessons and things that kept you grounded while you were going through your experience, especially being laid off, especially as like an early employee who's looking to catapult their career into things. And going back to what you were talking about with your company Grounded, how have things been for you so far? And what have been some of the things that you've learned from now being on your own and having these experiences?
Yeah, so Grounded started, well, really it came out of getting laid off. And then two was like my one of my best friends, she was like, Alyssa, like she also had a marketing consulting company. And she's like, Alyssa, like, why don't you just like, you know how to do marketing. Like, why don't you just start one and just have clients? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's gonna work. Da, da, da. And then next thing I knew, like my mom like was like, how are you doing with paying bills this month? And I was like, not gonna lie, like I don't know where this money's coming from. But I mean, at this point, God works it out every single month. So I was like, I'm this month's no different. And she was like, well, here's some money. Can you help me with some marketing for my company? My mom also owns a company. She owns Leading LLC, which basically helps Atlanta public schools like put books in their libraries. So teachers and librarians come to her for education consulting to decide what to put in their libraries, and she purchases it and orders it for them. Anyways, so that's what I was helping my mom with. She's like, Lisa, help me with marketing. She's been in the business for like what, 8 years. Um, and I was like, oh, I guess this is happening. So literally the next day, I was like, came up with the name for it. I came up with the branding for it. I put the Instagram page up, and I created it. And my mom was my first client. The next thing I knew, like I was getting referrals from people. Like people were telling their friends, like, oh, Lisa started a marketing company, and they were sending them my way. So I currently have like 3 clients, including my mom. And I just started a month ago. So it's been such a blessing, and I love it so much. And what's crazy is like, I told you that I was going to become a therapist. And in a way, I still feel like I became one, because that's really what I'm doing is I'm helping people like feel confident in their business and what they're doing. And like, I even had a client say, you don't know how much like you helping me gave me such a sense of relief. Like, it's an emotional thing too. Like, it's also their baby. Like, these businesses are their babies. And so like helping clients like really feel confident in what they're doing, like, it's been so cool to witness of like how this has kind of come full circle. So it's been such an amazing thing. I'm so glad like I got pushed to do it.
Like, that's crazy to even think about, of like, you're only a month in, but look, that speaks also to your craft as well. And that speaks to also your skill, how much people trust what you do and what you're enabled to do. And I will say, like, even from my standpoint of just seeing like the things that you're putting out, I mean, it's genius. Like, it's really, really amazing to see how much, like, you can tell there's so much love put into it. There's so much care put into it, to where I can confidently say, like, anything you've done, I've never seen anywhere else. And that even stands for like other, I mean, maybe I've seen some other book clubs in my day. Girl, I don't know. But it's like, I don't see book clubs operating the same way that you're operating, and especially in the city of Atlanta. Like, building a community out here is super unique because of how Atlanta's built. Everybody's looking to make a name for themselves, but also you have all of these different communities here. You have like the business community, you have the fashion community, you have the beauty community. Atlanta is one of the places that is not only affluent, I would say, in terms of you have your money makers with film and all that stuff, but we're also affluent in soul in terms of how much people are able to build here, whether that is from a market standpoint, but really from a people standpoint. And this is one of the places where, oh, you know, someone who knows another person who knows another person that I might be able to connect with, or you know, someone that's able to do blah, blah, blah. And I think you're in a perfect set position to where I can easily see you and all of the companies you're building underneath you to truly be something that no one has ever seen before. In the uniqueness, in the likeness, I've never seen anybody so intentional in terms of you're creating a community that caters to all of those other communities, where everybody can come, be their authentic self. Everybody can sit down and be able to have candid conversations and connections that will truly be brought together because they're feeling like this is another home that they can come to. And I think that's something, whether it's undergrounded or whether it's under Hauswarm, it's going to be felt. And that energy is going to go ways of ways for you, especially in the opportunities that you're looking to get. I've never met anybody so committed to that.
Now you almost making me cry over here. My gosh. Oh my gosh, that is so nice of you to say. And I think like one is just validating like here, like, I mean, like I like one of the things with book club is like the focus. I was like, honestly, like I didn't really tell them this like so outwardly, but I was like, honestly, I could care less about books. Like, I could care less about the fact that we're talking about a fiction book. I could care less about the fact that we're talking about romance. I'm bringing y'all here to build relationships and build conversations and using books as a platform for it to go elsewhere. Love that it's books, and I'm glad like that's where I started because I also have a love for books. But at long term, like that's the point. That's what this is about. And so like another point was like I wanted it to feel like as humans we're multifaceted. We're not just readers. We also like to walk. We also like to run. We also like to talk. Maybe also we don't like to talk. And it's like I wanted to create a space where people can feel all of themselves in one single club. So that's why like we volunteer. Like that's why we have silent reads where you don't need to talk. But we also have like social hours. We have book swaps. We have like walks. And it's like that was so important for me to have like be built into the club because I didn't want it to be just one thing. I think the coolest and most amazing part of humanity is that we're not one thing. We're so many beautiful things, and that people can experience all those beautiful things together with the variety of backgrounds that we have. And I'm so blessed that so many different types of people have gravitated towards the book club. Like so many races, so many ethnicities, so many backgrounds, so many personalities have come together and been like, this is a spot where I feel comfortable in, even though like the person they're talking to looks nothing like them, doesn't come from the same background. But what they do know is that they share a love for reading, and that's what binds them together, but it also flourishes into a whole different type of relationship. And that's what the point is. And so like it's just been so cool just to see how it's actually like working and how it's actually moving, and it's been such a blessing just to see from the outside. And yeah, it's been so cool.
Yeah, and if you say you're on the outside, then I'm basically in space. Because I have never, like, up until meeting you and knowing that the Atlanta Book Club exists, I still have like never had the chance to go to an event yet, which I have some on my calendar. But taking that from a person who's never been, and I can tell, like, we've never explicitly talked about the Atlanta Book Club, even when we met, really, and just being able to tell from looking at an Instagram page and hearing you talk about other things, I'm able to see that picture very clear of what the book club is. And I think you should take that, especially in a lot of pride of what you do, because the fact that people who've never been are still able to analyze that and see that this is the purpose of what you're trying to do, and seeing how valuable that is, especially within the community this early on, is really, really huge, especially for what you're looking to do next. If that's something that can be garnered from an outside audience, imagine what the introspective perspective would look like for everybody who's already a part of it.
Oh, that is, yeah, that is so nice. And I think like when I was like building also like the marketing side of my brain and like building that page, it was like one thing you'll notice throughout is like people laughing and people having conversations. And that was a point for me of like, because you think when you think of book clubs, you think of people sitting in a circle talking about serious conversations, like not having fun. And it's like I don't want to be that. Like I want it to be like people are having fun, like we're just chatting. Like I think you said you're going to come to one, so like one of our book discussions is literally the first and really usually only question I ask is, what are your thoughts? Or like I don't ask a whole bunch of like serious question. I'm like, what is on the top of y'all's head? Let's talk about it. Let's chat. And then it becomes a conversation of its own. Like I don't like it. I didn't want it to be very structural. Like I didn't want it to be too serious. Now we do talk about some like deeper things like about life, but it's like I just want people to feel like they could just talk and have a good time, where it's a place where they can feel relaxed and get stuff that's floating in their head out. And so like that was also, yeah, in the intention of putting the page together, like is I wanted to make sure that that energy was coming across of like, y'all, we're here to have a good time. Like it's never that serious. It's never that serious. And so like I kind of wanted to bring a different perspective of like what a typical book club is. That's why I almost even don't even want to call it a book club. I think it's more of a social club, of like really bringing that energy of like creating that community out, that you typically probably wouldn't see in a book club. So it's amazing to hear you say that. I'm glad like that's coming through even as someone who hasn't been before.
I think there are so many things that you just said that are so critical to not even just parts of like what you're doing particularly, but even things that are needed to really like make anything stand out, but also survive, like that has real longevity. And that is people being happy, right? People really enjoying where they're at, enjoying what they do, enjoying the product that they might use, like even if it is a book, and bringing that relevance to just how utility is important. Like your happiness is so important, and putting that at the forefront, it's so easy to be able to incorporate other things, like whether that's books, whether that's food, whether that's drinks, whether that's walking, if it's all pertaining to your happiness. And then you have a social environment or community where you're able to do that, that just brings so much just feelings of wellness and happiness in a way that you just can't really explain beyond like, oh, where'd you go? Oh, yeah, I went and hung out with my community. And it's like, oh my gosh, your community does all these things. And you just look so refreshed and recharged. Like, I can see people talking about your community that way, not necessarily just, oh, how was book club? Like, because that's always maybe like the general question that people say, like, oh, how was book club? And then versus people coming back and like their people asking them, oh, how was like your hangout? How was like your environment? I would ask, how was your journey today? Because I mean, it seems like there's so many different things that can go on within just this one session. And of course, you're bridging these gaps within the community of being able to intersect in some ways, and just making that so accessible is something that's also really, really important. It's something that everybody can join in. It's something that creates these almost new forms of interconnection beyond like the intersectional communities that you have. There are no divides, there are no forms or guidelines that you have to be a part of to be able to enjoy this. Everybody can enjoy that.
Yeah, that is so true. Like creating something that everyone can enjoy or can enjoy is also, I realize, like you have to be very intentional too. Like even when like coming up with the branding for it, like I was like, okay, like making sure, is this a neutral? Like, is this going to gravitate towards like both men and women? Like, is this going to be too feminine? And so I kind of think about stuff like that. Like even, like as I was noticing, I was like, why are men not coming to our events? And I was like, and so when a guy does show up, and we've had guys who, glad it's like increasing now, but when we'd have a guy show up, I'd literally be like, hey, I'm so glad to have you. Also, why are you here? Because we need more of you. Like, what is it about it? And so one of the comments that they said was like, oh, well, typically like a lot of us guys, we read nonfiction books. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because we usually choose like fiction books. And so I literally was like, okay, we're going to put a nonfiction book for this month. And so we have both a fiction and nonfiction, literally so we can have more guys and make more guys feel more comfortable coming to the club, because I want to be very intentional about making sure it is a space for everyone. And I want to have, like, this is also a club based on conversation too. So it's like, I want to hear, I think we as a collective want to hear different perspectives from different backgrounds. And it's like, as much as I love the ladies, I love the girlies, it's also nice to have that perspective from men too. And I think obviously like they're different beings. So it's like nice to be able to have those conversations. So it's been so cool. Even before we added in the nonfiction book, that they're starting to come. And I realized that they also come when they see that other guys are coming. So I also noticed that. So if I have a guy, I make sure he's also in our social media. I'm like, y'all, they're here. We're here. And so yeah, so like that's so good of like trying to create something for everyone. But yeah, I think it also involves a level of intentionality too. Like sometimes it won't naturally like come, like everyone will feel comfortable coming. Like you kind of have to create the space. I mean, I think it kind of relates to like being black and like the power of representation. It's like, even though we've gotten a lot better with it, like representation is so important. Like we value seeing our faces in spaces because there's still some assumption that the space is not for us unless we see that it's for us. So I think it's the same way of like just living our lives of like, sometimes we don't assume that these places are for us until we like see someone else there that looks like us, or like see something that we're interested in and they're like, oh, like let me gravitate towards it. So like, yeah, it does involve like a little bit of intentionality sometimes when you see it's not naturally happening. So yeah, it's cool that you say that.
And even going off of your note of talking about creating those spaces for individuals or even for, those communities that aren't necessarily not just coming because they don't want to come. It's literally just because they're looking to see how they can fit in the community. And I want to kind of do a blast back from the past of talking about the first community that you created starting in high school with your community that you created that you now collab with Parshmak a lot. Where did that come from? Where did that need for community start back then?
Yeah, I almost want to say like, I don't even know if I can even call it a community, honestly. I think it kind of became a thing of community later on, probably within the past 3 years. But honestly, like that business started because I went to Plato's Closet and they were like, I was like, you're gonna give me $5 for all these clothes. And so I was like my sister was on Poshmark, and so I started selling on it too. And I realized like, oh, it was like, this is nice, like making money. And very fortunately, like, my parents didn't want us working in high school. Like our focus was strictly like school and like after school activities. So um, I still like, I think I was given a very entrepreneurial like leadership personality in mind from the get-go. So I was like, I can't just stand here and not do nothing. Like I need I have needs. I have an outfit that I want to buy. There is gonna have to be a way I can pay for it. So that's kind of how Poshmark began, like selling on Poshmark. Then it eventually grew like throughout high school, and then probably grew to its kind of peak in college, to a point where like between all platforms, I was making like $10,000 a year, like as a college student. Like, and it was so nice. I didn't have to ask my parents for money. Like I was able to help my friends with groceries. I was selling stuff for my friends so they could have some money too. Like, so it was such a cool way. And I think at that point, then it's kind of rippled into a community aspect of bringing people in. And like at one point, like I was selling clothes for my parents' friends, and my parents, my mom. I still so close for my mom, and my sister. And then Poshmark started having these events, and I would go to them, and that's when I started meeting people within the community. And then next thing I knew, like they had this portion in their event where they were like, share your story. And I basically shared my whole story with Poshmark and how it grew. And then they're like, oh, wait, we love your story. Like, we're going to pitch it to different news companies and see where it goes. And next thing I knew, like a couple weeks later, they're like, oh, Alyssa, like we got picked up in News and World Report. What is the thing? News and World Report or something. And then they asked me to do 11 Alive. And then I'm going to be speaking at their conference. So it's like little things just kind of added. Like, I feel like I've stumbled into a lot of things. Like, I feel like I never really asked to, like, even with my full-time career, like, I stumbled into that. Like, stumbling into Poshmark stuff, like stumbling into Grounded, like, because of me getting laid off. And I'm like, I need to just find a solution. So I feel like a lot of my things have me just kind of been me falling into things, or like, I'm like, I see a need here. I need to fix something here. So maybe it's me being very controlling of my life. That's really probably what the base of all this is I can't stand still. I can't do nothing. Like, I have to be doing something. Yeah, it kind of became a community after the fact, but definitely started as a more selfish, not gonna lie, a more selfish reason.
Okay, so we went from I need to figure out how to buy myself an outfit to now I need to figure out how to create communities within my own central space that lead to a great amount of connections and people just being able to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, yeah, really.
Stay selfish. Stay selfish, everyone.
I will say, like, in high school, I was very community oriented. Like, I still had that community aspect in high school, even while I was doing Poshmark. I was vice president and then president of UNICEF. So that was an organization that helps children around the world just have better livelihoods. So I was helping leading that charge. And then I also helped with a friend who also was a small business owner. We started like a conference called the Youth Entrepreneurship Conference. It sounds a lot bigger than it was. Literally, I think we had 3 people show up. Um, we helped them start businesses and like give them motivations for middle schoolers. But that was really kind of like more so about the heart of like what I think I envisioned my life of. Like, I just loved helping people, and I just loved like bringing people together and helping them figure out what their dream is. And I think what's crazy, I feel like I'm still talking about me becoming a therapist in all these different parts of my life. And I'm like, I think I just did, but not actually get a PhD for it. But yeah, so like I still had that sort of community building within high school as I was doing it. Yeah, community kind of became the glue, I feel like, to everything. And then in high school, like I was the what was I? I was the youth and mentorship coordinator for Oxford College of Emory. So that was connecting with organizations and like throwing events. So we threw like a science event for their Boys and Girls Club, a local Boys and Girls Club nearby. So yeah, so it's been cool seeing like how that has been pretty the stable thing in my life is community. And when everything else goes awry, it's like I always figure out how to be plugged back into community because I think it grounds me, it centers me, and it just reminds me of like why I'm here. I just feel so natural in those environments. So yeah.
But I think that's great though that you have that as a source. You have that as almost like your outlet to recharge. And as much as you're saying like, oh yeah, I'm talking about all these ways that I've been a therapist, I do think you're right. And another way of looking at it is you used your degree. Like, this is exactly
Well,
hello, like psychology.
well, you're not wrong. Not you say that. You're making me feel a lot better about spending way too much money at Emory.
Like it's so wild seeing people. Like, I feel like I've talked to so many different people and they all say, oh yeah, I used to, want to do this, or I got my degree in this, but now I do something completely opposite. And then the more they talk about it, the more that they talk about their passions and how it's aligned with what they're doing now and blah 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 blah. And like, oh yeah, well I blah blah blah. And I'm like, so you used your degree.
Well, you do have a point there, miss.
Fuck it.
You do have a point there, miss. I think what's cool is like having friends who did go into business school, and then also go into corporate. And then working with people who went to business school, like even at my like place of work or knowing people. I think there is a cool thing about coming from the humanities, of coming from psychology and sociology, where you have a different level of understanding of people and like how to talk to people. And like really what it comes down to is like, do you actually care about the people that you work with? Because people will smell when you couldn't care less about them. Like it'll show up in like how you treat them. It'll show up in like the work that you give them and how you give them work. And especially like when I kind of was stepping into more management into my job, it's like I kind of was like, you know what? Some of this stuff is not that serious. Now, don't get me wrong, we still got our work done, but it's like, how can we do it in a way where people are not freaking out, where people are feeling like their stress level is through the roof and they can't go to sleep tonight? Like, how can we figure out a way where we can still get this done at the same time without stressing people out? And it's like, I want to say that part of myself came from having that background of like knowing what happens when people are stressed out, like knowing what happens when people are constantly being pushed in a workplace of constantly being in a stressful mindset and their bodies feel it. And it's not good for anybody. It's not good for their families. It's not good for their friends because that trickles on to things outside of work. So it's like, how can I keep an environment where people can feel at ease but still get the work that needs to be done? And I think that kind of is a credit to like having that background of what can happen if things go awry. Like people are going to get like burnt out, like, and we don't want that obviously as a company. So yeah, I think you're right. It's like in a way, like I did use my degree, even though yeah. So I love that.
I think about that all the time from an anthropology perspective too, of just thinking about like, I've seen how civilizations play out. I've studied how civilizations play out. Companies are just little mini civilizations. And it's like, let's unpack that and then see like, if you don't take care of your people, watch how all of this crumbles. And you think there would be enough business cases or case studies in the world to be able to tell people, hey, this is how we shouldn't, blah, blah, blah. But as new technologies happen, as new trends arrive, suddenly you have all these unique things. But one thing that may not change, like really from a big perspective, is people. Usually you can be able to figure out from what we know about people beforehand, all the research that's done around people, we have the resources where we can help to mitigate a lot of those things. And then at least in those new environments, we all need to know how to stay grounded to some degree. And so to your point of just understanding how people are thinking from that internal perspective of like, this is what happens when people get stressed. This is what happens when people get burnt out. This is what happens when you don't pay people for their time. Like basically what equates to all those things. I hope people and companies also learn to value that more of people who are able to have that humanities background, but also still be able to operate in a corporate mindset, or really just using people who also just genuinely care about people. And then if you have people that are a combination of all three of those things, I mean, that's get three of them, make your own set of Powerpuff Girls, and save your organization when it comes down to it.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think even in this generation, that is becoming more and more important to these later generations of like, if I'm not happy here, what are we talking about? Like, why are we here? And I think it kind of also goes to this like idea of options. And we see so many different options. And it's like, honestly, like a lot of us, like people are like, I can become influencers. Like social media is like a job in itself. And so people feel like they have options. So if they are going to go into a corporate setting, they're like, what am I getting out of this? Like, am I growing? Am I happy here? So that those aspects are becoming a lot more important. And unfortunately, some of these corporate companies are not catching up to that. They're like, we're going to still run them down the mill, but it's like, if people are not going to want to work as long as maybe like they would have like 10 plus years ago, like as they would do now, because now there's so many more options. And now, even though they should have cared about the human long before, but it's now even more important to care about humans now, because people are going to feel when they're not being cared for, when they are being like overworked, or when they're not getting paid enough for their work. Like people are going to feel that. And they're like, the turnover is going to be even higher. So it's like, yeah, that's a good point of like, we've seen civilization play out. We've seen this not work. And now like generations are having more access to what other people are being paid and what other people are doing, where it's like, now it's like, okay, now people are caring more about how they're feeling and how they're being cared about, even more so now. So yeah.
Exactly. The thing that should have been the standard of caring for humans up front it's now becoming even more apparent where people won't even get back to you if you're not being upfront. So taking that in the ways that you will, especially those wanting to have this imminent growth and things like that, it's so important to stay people focused. I think anything that we're creating and people say, oh, there's a gap in the market for what? For who?
Well,
For what audience? Do they look like me?
well,
Are they human?
well,
Does a human take care of them?
well.
Case closed.
Book it.
Roll the credits.
Yeah, that's real.
And if you're not leading with that, you can't be mad when people ask, so what does my benefits package look like? Because these people, they don't just live to work, but they also don't necessarily work to live either. And people are seeing the difference in that of like these two options of live to work or work to live. Like there's a way in third options of like, maybe I just want to live to live.
Yeah.
Or maybe I just want to work too. You know, like everybody has their own jive of things, but nobody's getting prescribed to these societal norms or realities that we've always had before. And now you just have people living in their own nuances of just, I want to live to live. And, you know, sometimes it's just, I want to live today. Sometimes it's just, I want to work today. Sometimes I'm barely living today. Sometimes I'm barely working today. And then just being able to have that moment of you cannot think black and white. I used to think so back like black and white, but my favorite color has always been gray. We all need to look in the mirror because maybe sometimes we're not thinking gray enough.
Yeah, there's like, especially as I work also my psychology and sociology background, but also as like I'm being part of these communities, and obviously that naturally means meeting people and more people of different types of personalities. And it's like that gray, it's like there's so many things that we don't even consider about the way people show up in the world. Like you don't know what they dealt with in their childhood that's still showing up to how they showed up today. You don't know if the fact that they're in your presence right now meant that they had to drag themselves out of bed. Like they didn't want to get up that day. It's like there's so many things that we don't think about, and so many things that matter so much, and especially like how we show up, and like that can come across in our work, and that can affect how we work as well. And it's like as a company, like are you paying attention to that? And like as like I'm growing companies and like hopefully we have staff, is like that's something that Kayla and I, like we had to, Kayla's my sister who I am co-founding it with, like that's something that we're already like thinking about, is like, okay, hiring, it's not just about the work, but it's also like the people. Like if you get a call saying like, I know we're about to get serious, so trigger warning, like suicide, but like a founder was telling us that they got a call like that, if someone was like, I'm about to end my life, like what do you got to tell me before it's like, those are real situations. Like you're not just a company, you also are carrying, you have people behind you, and like you have to care about every single individual that works for you. It's not just about the business, but you have people you have to take care of. Like that's why HR teams are full-fledged in companies, because there's a whole thing about people that you have to care about, and not just the work that they do. And it's like you have to be able to show up in that way of like, if someone calls you with an emergency, like how are you going to deal with it? Like how are you going to show up if like someone's like, I'm sick? Like are you going to allow it, or are you going to be like, hey, I still need to show up today? Like there are workplaces that can be so toxic, and it's like, at what cost? Like at what cost are we going to push people over the edge for what? And I think that's why like the mindset of like why we do anything, like Kayla and I, when we started the company with Hauswarm, and like me with the book club, it's like I just want it to be people focused. Like I'm not making any money off the book club. Like Kayla and I are not making obviously any money off Housewarm at the moment. So it's like this has become a purely people person, a people focused company. And it's like that's how we want to move. It's like we just want, at the end goal of anything, like we would love for it to make money, but also like we want people to feel seen. We want people to have a space in this world. We want people to feel like they can articulate and communicate how they're feeling. That like if they are not feeling well, like let's talk about it. Like how are we doing? And so just being very intentional about allowing people to show up the way they feel, and not feel like they have to be like show up as a mask all the time. or at least if anything, create a space where they don't have to think about those things too. So it's like, yeah, it's such a, yeah, gray. It's like there's so many things happening in people's lives that you don't know about, but giving them the space to show up and support them however they decided to show up that day is going to be the game changer. Especially like in the future of companies' longevity, is like, how are you showing up for your people and not just the work that they do?
Exactly. And I think a lot of the times it's always, oh, companies are for profit, but not for people, without realizing you can be both. You don't have to restrict yourself from, obviously we know money makes the world go round, but a big part of that, if we're looking at the underbelly beyond money makes the world go round, people do as well. And not even like an underbelly, like they're on the surface too. So being for people and for profit, and being able to articulate those and communicate those effectively, not just to your investors, but to your intentional staff and these people. People ask so much of other people, and that's in like any case of the world, but especially thinking like you're putting together like JDs and job recs of these people, of these specific people. You're so intentional about this description. Let's make sure that we're intentional as well when that description is filled. The same care that you put into that and what you're looking and the needs you need, let's make sure that we're taking care of those people who are able to be picked for these positions in the exact same way of when you were crafting that JD. That person is obviously a business need. Let's not just think of them as a business need. Let's think of them in terms of what their body needs too.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I even think about like market. I know this is less on the internal end, but more on the external or external end of like marketing. Like we understand the value of storytelling and catering to audiences. Like we understand the value of like talking to people and being a solution to their problems, but it's like that doesn't carry over into the inside of the company of like, now how are we speaking to the people? Like how are we talking to them? And like how are we telling our story in a way that matters to them, where they feel like they're a part of the company, where they feel like they're valued? And it's like we understand it as a concept because we market it all the time. We market like, this is a solution for you, this is a place where you feel seen, this is a place where you feel comfortable, like this is a place for you. And it's like, are we telling that same, are we marketing to our internal company as much as we are marketing to outsiders? And it's like that is almost just as important. It's like that's what fuels companies, is the people coming from the inside who care about the mission just as much as the founder and the co-founder and the exec team, and really fueling the same mission to allow the things to flourish. So it's like we understand the concept of caring about people. So it's like, how are we putting that back into internally in the workplace?
Exactly. And I'm 100% with you. And as we start to wrap up the episode, I want to know from your insights of just everything you've gone through and all of your experiences, what have been some of your greatest lessons or some of your greatest affirmations, things that you just hold near and dear to you, of things that are just always going to be in your head whenever you're working on something, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whether it's just like, hey, girl, I'm just taking some time for myself. What are some of the things that ground you?
Yeah, like I would say one thing is like, honestly, like Jesus for me has been the best business partner, the best friend I've had. Like honestly, like I don't know how I would have gotten through this without like kind of knowing my purpose and what I do. And I think when you know your purpose of outside of like money and outside of like the exact activity, but you know, like I'm a loving person, I'm a community oriented person, I love people, like, and it just makes it so much easier to navigate through the world when you're like, I can show up, I can leave my house and go to the lobby and I'm still doing my purpose. Like, and just talking to people. Like that's not even a job that's making money, but that's just me living in my purpose. And that's me living my purpose every single minute. So it's like hard to even, I know like you can, like I've done it, like getting wrapped into a certain job, but it's like your purpose is in the everyday mundane things. Like that's in everything. Every time you walk outside your room, every moment, like when you're in your own house, like waking up, like you're living in purpose and just allowing it to be a part of every single part. It just takes the pressure off of like trying to find the one thing, like the one career that's gonna like push you towards your purpose. Like the one thing, like the one thing that you do, it's like, that's everything. Everything is part of your purpose. Like you just navigating this world is part of your purpose. And I think it just makes it so much easier to just live. And then another thing is like, I think we talked about this at the beginning, is like closed doors are allow for doors to be open. And so every closed door is just an opportunity for something better to happen. And I've seen that time and time again, especially in this season of like getting laid off and just seeing so many cool things happening that I don't think would have happened like if it wasn't for me getting laid off. Like literally a week after I got laid off, like that was the meeting I had with my sister about Hauswarm. Like that was like Poshmark contacted me 2 weeks later. Like Original Chop Shop wanted to work with us like for a brand new, like 3 weeks later. It's like all these things kept happening, and it's like it's been so cool to have the time to focus on those things and have the flexibility of like also being supportive of my mom. Like my grandpa got sick and being to go with her to visit before he passed away like a month or two later. So it's like I wouldn't be able to do those things if I didn't have this time. So just allowing a perspective shift of like not seeing things as a negative, but seeing it as an opportunity for things has been such a game changer for me in living life.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and really just bringing yourself and bringing the vibes and bringing the energy, and that is felt through everything else that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Intentional Intern podcast. We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a boost of motivation to take on your career journey. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, and share it with your network. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback fuels our next great episode. Until next time, stay intentional, keep growing, and keep shining bright. See you in the next episode.